Joining me on Startup Report today is Keith Brophy, who runs the business labs for Emergent Holdings, which is a Blue Cross Blue Shield company out of Michigan. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Joe.
So you have a really cool job. You're basically out in the mix looking at all sorts of startups in the healthcare space.
It's a wonderful job because this is a time of great transformation in healthcare. And so we scout out companies that have innovations at the early stage and get a chance to hear, how they're looking to change the status quo.
And how do you interact with those companies? Do you bring potential investment to them, mentorship? Do you just help grease the rails for them to move forward? What do you offer?
We could interact in a variety of ways, but the primary engagement is to work together to structure pilots or experiments. So if we see a startup company that has a solution that's taking it forward and proving it out, we have a very large base upon which we can structure trials or pilots. I, at one point in my career, was a startup entrepreneur myself in the health tech space, and I understand firsthand how the biggest breakthrough for a business can be that opportunity to do a pilot that will touch a broad range of lives. And sometimes it's so hard to break into healthcare and get that break for your business. So that's where we really try to build a bridge to the startup businesses out there.
Yeah. And in your work, you get to see a lot of different businesses. And so you have your finger on the pulse of what's trending and what's going to be hot. I'd like to hear what are sort of the one or two areas you think that are going to be the hottest, but then I'd like you to follow it up with kind of the areas that you're personally most excited about that maybe don't get as much attention as they should.
We see a lot of areas of high momentum. Predictive analytics is certainly an area that's been around for a while, but there's a lot of new things going on with it. Predicting outcomes with accuracy from a wellness or a chronic condition journey to surgical outcomes and beyond is an area of a lot of interesting activity. And you can kind of take the step up from that and mention two approaches often regarded as buzzwords, but really with so much more deep potential: machine learning and artificial intelligence. The ability to use some of the frameworks today for AI and machine learning has changed the game. You can soak up like a sponge data from many sources and build a machine learning based data lake, and then interact with patient bases, member bases, continue to enrich and expand that lake and gain more and more insights from the magic of machine learning correlations. It's been said that only half of the solutions out there that call themselves artificial intelligence are truly AI, but that's almost beside the point. The leverage of data in new and powerful ways is changing the face of healthcare in the years to come. Those are both regarded as pretty mainstream. Wearables is also an area of a great deal of interest and focus, from the recent Apple Watch offering, which is a wonderful healthcare platform on a wrist, to the various fitness bands out there, and the evolution of the fitness bands and wearables to provide more and more monitoring and points of data. Those are leading edge areas, but more traditional areas. Some of the areas where I think we'll see some really interesting movement that are probably underestimated are virtual reality. Virtual reality has grown up, if you will, and become cheaper as well. You can get an Oculus Go headset for $199 standalone and have the richest VR experiences. And you're starting to see the movement of healthcare into some of these great, flexible, immersive VR platforms. So I expect to see breakthroughs ahead there. The other area I would highlight is robotics. Robotics have been around for a long time in our nation, but not really consumer-facing robotics. But we're seeing the emergence of healthcare helper robots in Japan, elder care robots, and eventually those technologies will gain a foothold here. With that, in terms of startup company opportunities, there's not only the opportunity to build those solutions, and those may be the domain of large companies, but a whole host of ways to leverage the data to come up with innovation built on top of VR and robots.
And a lot of those sound like they skew potentially younger. I think my sort of perception is that a lot of medical related startups, they tend to have a older founder population historically, because a lot of them had to be doctors or had some experience going forward. But a lot of things you mentioned right there, data specifically can exist, without that experience. So do you think that the founder population in healthcare startups is starting to get younger?
The founder population is indeed getting younger. There is actually an advantage for non-traditional healthcare thinkers to come into the space. It's a wonderful time for some of these younger companies. A company started by, a group of MDs, for example, that are fairly senior in their careers, can bring forth deep, deep medical insights and expertise, but they could very well be constrained by their own thinking of what the possibilities are, where a digital technologist can think broadly out of the box. Healthcare is ripe for disruption. So, the traditional thinking can be a handicap as much as an advantage in 2019.
And with those freer thinkers, we'll call them, a lot of times they're going to hit up kind of a brick wall, which is bureaucracy, insurance companies, regulation, and they're not, they're going to have to sort of conform to a thing that can be a way of operating that can be very frustrating to them. So how do you, when you work with these younger companies, do you find yourself having to prepare them for getting into that sort of world?
We do a great deal of prep with the younger companies that we work with, sometimes explaining the complexities of healthcare. I was just in Tel Aviv, Israel, meeting with their very dynamic health tech community. One of the reasons that innovation flourishes there is their healthcare system is more straightforward. There's a lot of aspects of their simpler healthcare system that accelerate innovation. So whether it's here on the home front, from Detroit to St. Petersburg, to overseas, we find we have to put a fair amount of energy into helping to decode healthcare. And that's on both sides, helping startups understand how to approach it, but also helping healthcare entities figure out how to map in the innovation.
And you come from Michigan, which is, I would say, similar to Florida in its investor demographic, right? Here, perhaps previously we were a little heavier into real estate. I don't know how Michigan was, but it seems now, though, that there is a lot of money out there looking for good tech startups. So coming from being an entrepreneur, do you feel that the world of the investor world, the angel world, has opened up to these more innovative companies in the last couple of years?
I do feel that the investor world has opened up much more to health tech companies. And, if we rewind to 8, 9 years ago, I was crisscrossing the nation pitching to VCs for my health tech company. So I understand the space. And it's still not easy for an early stage pitcher, but there is much, much more potential funding out there. There's money with a very high appetite for healthcare transformation investment. I think the toughest positioning today is still that stage right before revenue really starts to flow, where the idea is beginning to be proven out. Maybe there's the first couple of breaks for a business getting deployment, but it's not yet started the early stage scale. And that often seems to be where the most need for funding is and the most challenge in securing it. But there's more avenues to explore today with what I would call angels, high-end angels, and VCs that are open-minded to looking earlier in the pipeline than there used to be.
So since you were a founder and you raised, and now you are around lots of companies that are raising, I'd love to give our listeners, who some of which are founders, a little bit of your wisdom. So can you talk about, in all the founders that you see and in your experience, what are some of the things that you wish they all could kind of know and believe going into it to save them headaches, specifically in the healthcare space?
A couple pieces of advice I would share include be flexible. Probably be rare you can engage with a large healthcare entity and not have to flex and adjust in the process of deploying a solution. You might think because an entity is large and traditional and established, it would be predictable. But when you're pushing forward innovation, it's a challenging status quo, and it does take a partnership with healthcare entity and the entrepreneur to flex and figure it out. The other area that I would emphasize is build your proof points. I'm surprised how many early stage businesses that I meet with that share what their solution can do, but they don't proactively surface proof points. And a proof point can be a lot of different things. If you've tried your solution out to get feedback from a group of 40 family and friends, or you've asked 3 different healthcare institutions, they've given you feedback, you can formalize that, put it in a matrix, quantify the feedback. It doesn't have to even be good feedback. Just the fact that you can prove that you've taken steps to understand and quantify your solution. Most early stage businesses are not in the position to carry out a formal trial in the traditional sense, but the more you can formalize your findings starting right out of the gate, then continuing to do it, then you can show the incremental improvement. That helps tremendously to help an innovation solution move forward in a healthcare entity.
That's great advice. Thank you. How can people learn more about you in the Business Lab?
We are very interested in hearing about any exciting healthcare innovation out there. And those that have an innovation they want to talk about can reach out to me directly. My email is keith.brophy at emergentholdingsinc.com. And because that's kind of a mouthful, I'll repeat it one more time. Keith.brophy at emergentholdingsinc.com. We hold a virtual pitch event where we bring together good ideas and surface them to a handful of experts from within our organization. We do that a couple times a year, and companies can pitch via WebEx over the phone and share what they're thinking of and explore whether it could be a pilot fit for us. So if there's anybody out there listening with a great idea that you're stewarding along, feel free to reach out.
And I know of a good virtual reality company we actually have on pitch list that I'm going to make sure they pay attention to this because I think you really like them.
Excellent. Yeah.
And as Bear's mentioning, you are down here from Michigan to participate in the Sunny Side Up series, which is put on by the Kate Tiedemann School of Business and Dean Sri Sundahar and the St. Pete Downtown Partnership with Jason Mathis. It was a great event, and I'm sure you didn't mind coming down to Florida, though.
I love coming down. I'm going to be back here given all the exciting things going on in the community.
That's great to hear. All right, we'll catch up with you then, and thanks for stopping in.
Thank you.